Welcome to another episode of the Relationship Toolbox, a show about the skills we need to build healthy relationships with others. As you can probably tell, we're coming to you by Zoom in order to accommodate our special guest today, Sera Wideawake, who is a recent graduate of the Rutland school system and who's very active in the field of communication studies. So welcome to our show, Sera.
Thank you for having me.
Sera, after watching the digital presentation on strategies for regulating emotions that you were doing, I was so impressed with your knowledge of this and your interest in it. To see someone your age taking such an interest in this. So for those of us in my generation, it's taken us a lifetime sometimes to realize the importance of some of the things that you've been discussing. So I was very impressed with that. Even with clients that we work with, it's a hard sell for our generation to get them to understand the significance of emotions, the role that it plays in our generation. So they still often will refer, even in business, to any studies like this as those soft skills. And in working with supervisors, sometimes I find that they they consider these skills sort of a nuisance, sort of that they're messy to deal with people's feelings, and they should be avoided or minimized as much as possible. So, and parents are often unaware of their own feelings and the impact that those feelings are having on their children as they're interacting with them. So I really congratulate you on how far you have come, and you're ahead of the mainstream, so to speak, in your understanding of this. So when I was talking about this with Marsha, and she said that she knew of you and your interest in this, we thought, what a wonderful thing to have you on the show. And we just had so many questions we wanted to kind of ask you about how you got to this point. So I think with that, Marsha, let's start in with some of those questions that we're curious about.
Let's just ask, how did you decide, or what drew you to inquiring and examining, studying emotions?
I mean, I think there's a lot of factors. Personally, I always like to be very in tune with myself and know what's kind of going on with myself. So I have a personal interest in it, but also working through the Rutland Rec and working with kids who sometimes are not in the best home situation, and just kind of try to talk with them and like see what's going on, and realizing how big of a role that emotions play in the reason children act a certain way really kind of spiked my interest. And from there, I just wanted to study more and learn more about it. And so over the past year, I had a great mentor, an internship I did with Stacy Shortle, and I learned so much.
She was a previous guest on our show.
Yes, she prepped me a little for it. She was talking about it. And she was a great mentor, and she had given me a book to read by Mark Brackett, and everything he wrote was just so inspiring, and just shared a lot about like emotions, and he did it in a really personal way where he shared his story. And I think when it comes to emotions and mental health and talking about that and making it a more accepted thing, the best way to go about it is to share your story. And I feel like that just draws people in, because you're not just speaking from numbers or statistics, you're speaking from experience. And I think that is really what gets people. So I really enjoy sharing my story and sharing what's helped me, because learning about this stuff, I mean, I'm learning about it to share with other people, but also like everything I'm reading is helping myself as well.
So we were aware of that, and Tom and I looked a little bit into Mark Brackett's work, and he talks about being able to talk about feelings and self-regulation. Did you find anything out more about that?
So in his book, he shares with us, and this is all in my little video series that you guys have looked at, but he shared with us a ruler concept where each letter stood for something. It was an acronym. So the first R stand like stood for recognizing your emotions, then understanding, expressing, labeling, and regulating. And he just kind of goes through all those steps. And the expressing step is the part where you're sharing with other people. And he talks about how that can be one of the most difficult steps. And it definitely is, because it brings you to a vulnerable place and you have to really tell people where you're at exactly. And that can definitely be something hard for people to do. And I think there's a stigma around emotions, definitely, and sharing them. And like he had talked about earlier, it being kind of a soft topic to talk about, and it's something that like is sometimes frowned upon. But really, when you look at it, going through your emotions and being able to share that with other people is a really strong skill to have. And it takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. And I think being able to really look into yourself and see what might need fixing, what might need to be adjusted, areas you need to work on, takes a lot of strength. And to be able to do it every single day to keep yourself on track takes a lot of strength.
I think it takes a vocabulary to talk about feelings and emotions as well. And I'm not sure that we all have a really rich vocabulary. We have kind of like a couple of big stroke feelings, like I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, but there are a lot of nuances in between. Did you find that, or do you find that with students, with school, with workplace?
Yeah, definitely. He touches on that a lot too. And the one that I think is most relatable for students and even the average person who goes to work every single day is the emotion stress. And I feel like it's so easy to just label your feeling as stressed, where it could be more specifically overwhelmed. You're feeling an immense amount of pressure. You could be stressed. And throughout his book, he really breaks down what each one of those means and kind of goes in depth of it. And being able to break down that overall feeling of stress into a smaller piece, like, okay, I'm feeling a lot of pressure from like up above, if it's at your job, or you're feeling pressure from teachers at school, and then being able to kind of communicate, okay, well, I'm feeling a lot of pressure from you. I need you to back off a little bit. I can't manage right now. Like, it helps you to be able to, when you can pinpoint and you have more vocabulary, then it can definitely help you to solve that problem a little bit quicker.
Yeah, Tom and I have talked about that in other shows when we've talked about parents sitting down and giving young children the skills to talk about the vocabulary of what they're feeling and to normalize it and to make it okay.
Even Dr. Phil has often said on his program, you can't fix something that you haven't identified.
Yeah.
So right, exactly. And I think with parents, one of the most important things is you're not only giving them the tools, but also when you're doing that and you having those open conversations, you're validating the feelings that they're having. And like one of the things I've read is like when you're sitting down with a kid and they're throwing a tantrum and saying, instead of like immediately yelling and saying, hey, don't do that, maybe say it's okay to have big feelings, but this is not how we share our big feelings, like expressing it in a manner where you're not saying it's not okay to have those feelings. You're saying it's not okay to express them in that exact manner of throwing things around and breaking things. And there's a better way to do that. And that's with having the vocabulary. And of course, no one's perfect and it's a working skill, but as long as you're working at it every single day, then you're doing something right.
It sounds like you would be a fun camp counselor and you would be understanding of the lots of rhythms that happen in a group throughout the day.
A lot of empathy.
I can tell you I am not perfect and my empathy runs short fast sometimes.
So
that's for all of us there. At least knowing what we're trying to work toward is helpful, isn't it? To know that,
goals.
Well, I missed the boat this time, but I know what I'm trying to accomplish at least.
Right, and having that baseline to go back to and having your values and just being able to remind yourself of those things so you can get yourself set back on track. And like I said, nobody's perfect and it's an everyday thing that you're constantly working to just be the best version of yourself. And that's something that keeps me on track because I remind myself I'm working to do the best version of myself and I'm never going to reach that because there's always a better version. So it's like you're always working.
So you said that examining and expressing your emotions takes some vulnerability. Have you, either in your research or in your life experience at school or in your families or in your workplace, noticed that some groups think emotions matter and they're better at these skills than others? Are there any stereotypes that you've noticed?
That's a hard one. I think there's definitely stereotypes. I think, honestly, I've noticed sometimes with the older generation, there's a lack of understanding when it comes to that. Just like, why are you talking about mental health so openly? Why are you talking about your emotions so openly? Like, it's kind of like a voodoo topic that's like, why are you doing this in
because
public?
they may not be comfortable with it. It's like,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it definitely is an uncomfortable thing, but I think we're definitely going in the right direction of talking about it openly. I mean, even on social media, scrolling through, I get ads for like free therapy apps, and like these are common things that are talked about where people share their stories, or talking with my friends and they're like, yeah, I have a therapy appointment. It's no different than saying I have a dentist appointment. So it's something that's become way more normalized that I think is so huge, because there is definitely a stigma around thinking therapy is for people who are really sick or having a really hard time, and you could be doing completely fine and just need someone to talk to. Like,
we're going through that right now with the Olympics with Simone, that she's experiencing that, having to drop out. So I think that's another thing that's coming to light that you mentioned. Sera, can you tell us also, in light of that question that Marsha just asked, what about the stereotypes that may occur in terms of male, female, or are there things that you're still experiencing with kids your age that, it's not okay for a boy, say, to cry or to be upset about something, or girls are ditzy, that those stereotypes that we commonly have experienced, and I think women in our generation still are trying to get out.
Take off.
Yes.
I think there will always be some kind of stereotype somewhere in the world and against some group, but I definitely think there's a change happening, and I think growing up with so many different changes being pushed to move, like we've went through the Black Lives Matter movement. That was huge. Like, that makes history, and living through that and experiencing and watching the pain it's caused people, and it's just a moving situation. Even watching women fight for their rights in some states, it's a moving experience to watch. And it's something that definitely is helping to break those stereotypes, because they're being talked about, and the hard things to talk about and the uncomfortable things to bring up are the most important. And having those uncomfortable conversations, whether it is about race or it's about someone's sex or it's about their orientation or it's about their emotions, talking about all those things are definitely things that make a change. And so as they can be uncomfortable to talk about, like emotions are uncomfortable to talk about, I think those conversations will soon break those stereotypes. And I think just being more normalized about talking about your emotions. There's definitely still a divide between men and women and them discussing their emotions, but the more it becomes normalized, I feel the more that stigma will kind of break.
As you're talking, I'm thinking that, certainly we have our skills and our emotions that are individual about what's happening to us, and we have them in relationship with other people. But almost we might have a national or regional emotion about what's happening in our social milieu, as well. Kind of a collective emotion that we as a society are expressing, very, very emotionally charged in lots of different directions.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Brackett, he talks about it being, he says emotions are relationships currency. So you sharing how you feel with each other is what creates that relationship. So the more we do that, the stronger your relationship's going to be. So when you're talking about communicating your emotions will strengthen that relationship. So I really like that he made that connection and that analogy and thought about emotions as your currency, because around the world, everyone has emotions, no matter if your currency is the same, but if you're sharing your emotions, that's how you're going to build those relationships with people halfway across the world.
Sure.
I like that
How
quote.
do you, Sarah, when you're dealing, say again, with someone in your age group who doesn't appreciate what you're talking about and may even start to make fun of someone who is sharing emotions, do you confront that, or how do you deal with that?
I think it depends on the situation. Emotions and internal work is nothing you can force upon someone. They have to be willing to make the changes and wanting to do that. So you can give them a piece of your mind and say, well, you should be doing this, if you're acting like that, or something along those lines, but it's not necessarily going to be effective. So sometimes, I don't know. It depends on the situation. Sometimes I try to look at it like, okay, well, maybe there's something going a little bit deeper there that it's not me, but they're projecting onto me. So maybe I just walk away from that situation and not try to confront it right then. But
so each generation makes comparisons to each other, good, bad, or just observations. And sometimes it's said that the younger generation is the most connected through Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter and text and this and that. But and mass, like you'll send out information to 100 people, but that they are less likely to have deeper connections and relationships. First of all, do you agree with that statement?
To an extent, I think I agree with that statement. There's so many factors that go into it. Where my generation and the generation right before me, we were one of the first to go through growing up completely immersed in technology. I remember middle school, it was when I was in grade school is when the first iPhones were coming out. And so we were really directly immersed in that. And I think it builds connections, but at the same time, it can be draining to your mental health because you're always connected. People can always reach you. I know sometimes I'm I just need to shut my phone off because everyone can reach me and I just don't want to be reached. Yeah. I just want to be in the moment. And I think it comes with, this is what we're growing up with. So it comes with, as you're getting older, you start to appreciate those in-person connections a little bit more. But I also think it is a bit different because you can reach anyone at any moment. It's not like when I was I talk to kids at camp that are 6 years old and they have phones. And when I was 6, we would have your mom make a play date with my mom so we could hang out and they're texting each other. And I'm this is so different for me to see that because I had to make those in-person connections. But it's weird to see the younger kids having phones and texting each other.
Can you make those deep in-person rich connections through technology, or do you think you need to get off the platform?
I think they can start on the platform, but I think the deep connections, some of them stem in person, but you also, you can have a phone call and sometimes I feel like you can make an even deeper connection talking through the phone. You might share more deep information right off the bat than if you were in person because it's less vulnerable. You're behind a screen. You're not right in the room with someone. So I think sometimes it's easier to get closer to people faster. But that can also create, when you meet people in person, that can create a sense of, and they're different, that can create a trust issue. You're oh, well, they weren't like this on the phone and they're different now. So, I think it depends on the situation. I think you can create deep connections through the phone. And then it leads to an in-person relationship and a deep connection. But I definitely enjoy face-to-face being in person with people and having those kind of conversations.
I think possibly our ability to regulate and express our emotions has been hampered by the pandemic, and we kind of have to learn how to interact with people again as we venture out. What do you think teenagers, young adults kids in their 20s are feeling if they had to say what their emotions were right now in general? I know you're only one person, you're only speaking for yourself, but either through your experience in your peer groups or the research that you stepped into, what are young people feeling?
I mean, I think there's so many emotions you could express, but I think stress, pressure, frustration are some of the more negative ones. But I also think, there is some discouragement with the world, what's going on in the world right now all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely, especially the kids that are like my age and a little bit older, like college students growing up in that, and we're becoming adults in this world that seems like so chaotic. And not that it hasn't been chaotic before, but we're coming into adults in like a chaotic world, and that's definitely scary and can be discouraging because you're entering adulthood in a world that you feel is falling apart at times. But I think the stress and pressure also comes from kind of that stigma that older generations sometimes have, like, oh, they're just so engaged in their phones and they don't know how to have conversations with each other, and all they want to do is be lazy on their phones, and that pressure to like prove themselves, like, I'm not like that. Just because I have a cell phone and I have social media, it doesn't mean I'm just lazy. I have a work ethic. So that stress and pressure to do well and to prove yourself to older generations and your parents and
your teachers and your boss and
yeah.
And you bring up that word stress again, which you said earlier could be unbundled, and it really is kind of a mask sometimes for a lot of more nuanced emotions. Right?
Yeah, I think overwhelmed, all of that, overwhelmed, pressure, and stress, I think are the three top ones that I would say.
Something that I found interesting, and Tom and I were talking about it in preparation for today, is that if you can recognize and understand and express and regulate your own emotion, that there might even be some responsibility that you co-regulate your emotion with others, and that if you can do that, you can influence and kind of shape the emotions in a relationship in your interactions. Did you encounter any of that in your studies?
Yeah, it actually has a whole chapter in his book about co-regulation and how he goes through why it's important to regulate your emotions and how it affects all these different aspects of your life. And relationships are definitely a huge part of it. And so being in tune with yourself and understanding your inner workings helps with your relationships. You can't expect anyone to understand you if you don't even understand yourself. And so being able to explain yourself and know what your triggers are, know what makes you sad, but know what also makes you happy, and being able to share that with a partner or a friend or any relationship you have helps them out to know how to better help you and assist you in times of possibly need. So definitely co-regulation, being able to work with each other and have that open line of communication to help each other when you need is definitely super important. And just like you can positively help each other co-regulate, sometimes there can be a negative impact if you're being super negative and that person's, say they're living with you and you're constantly negative, then you're roping them into that and they're being immersed.
It's contagious sometimes,
yeah.
You know, your tone. How is it that you were able to investigate this and study this in school at the high school? How was that afforded to you? Well,
in the first semester, I did a capstone and I studied ACEs, and through that, I worked with Stacy Shorter a little bit because she has the Round Steering Grant, and she's been doing some work on social emotional learning and spreading that in our schools. So I first kind of got into working with her through my capstone, and then I did a place internship, and I worked with Stacy for my last semester, and she gave me a lot of guidance and a lot of resources to use, and I just kind of read up on it and came up with a project to share it with the rest of the school.
It's exciting that that learning these days can be personalized that way, so that you're able to do that. So what have you learned that you're going to take forward to either your next academic life or going forward here?
I mean, everything, like I said in the very beginning, everything I've learned is something that I try to apply to my own personal life. So all the skills that I learned through reading his books and the several articles I've read, I try to apply to my own life, and it's a daily practice I use. But I also am going to UVM next year to study psychology and plan on getting my PhD. So definitely something I plan on studying further.
Excellent.
You're well on your way with that curiosity.
Yeah.
We could talk for hours, but we are at our time limit here. Do you have any closing thoughts about what you might tell a younger self about what you've learned?
I would say be patient with yourself, but look into yourself and put yourself first. Definitely, your relationship with yourself is the most important one, and in order to have healthy relationships outside of that, you have to have a healthy relationship with yourself first. So definitely be patient with yourself, but take time to discover who you are and learn about yourself.
Thank you so much for being our guest today, and best of luck in your next adventure. And we thank our audience today for joining us on the Relationship Toolbox, and we'll be back with more advice on how to have healthy relationships.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.